Hello, Internet! Welcome to Wednesday's Serial. I wanted to talk about something different because mostly the people who watch this channel are people who have followed me for a while. If you're new, thank you. This is just going to be me blabbing about recent acquisitions. Why? Because it's also really determining what I'm going to be reading for a while. And I'm kind of excited about a lot of it, but I also overbought for a myriad of factors, which is part of what I also wanted to talk about. So I'm just going to kind of dig in and talk about some different things. Before I do, I should point to my background and how I'm sitting right now. I'm kind of sitting in a weird portion of my desk, but I do want to kind of have a background showing off a bunch of comics, I guess. Uh, the background, you'll see the dust jacket to my Daredevil Nimbus that I'm in the middle of. That's just because when I'm reading it, I didn't want to tear it or whatever. Also, it just felt better to read. I don't know. And unfortunately, I guess I'm jumping ahead here, but that a Nimbus that I bought, I mean, I got it from some discount seller because that's about the only way you can buy them anymore due to availability and how the market works. So I'm just going to go into that one. I found out a bit about publishing. So when it comes to the omnibuses or I don't know why I always say that wrong. Okay, but yeah, omnibus variants that you have because some of them have multiple covers. A lot of the bigger books and the things that are put more to the direct market. What they'll do generally is they'll have the hardcover sort of books, right? For just normal books, right? They have the hardcover, they put that out for a designated amount of time, usually about like 4 or 5 months. And then they'll want to pull all of those into inventory from the stores. And so they'll put a little like mark on the book. If there's any wrapping on the book, they'll put the mark on the wrapping that for whenever it's bought and sold that can be taken off. But since most books aren't like that, that's why you have a lot of books with tiny little marks on them, just visible but not usually so garish. And then they'll put out the soft cover, and that'll be out for usually a bit longer, is my understanding. And then what they'll do is maybe they'll repull that if there's another printing or something like that. But usually at that point, then a certain amount of the hard covers will go out. A certain amount of the soft covers will stay out based on of what was sold, what availability is, and then they'll just kind of leave that, and then a certain amount of the inventory pulled back will then go to kind of discount sellers that will put things on layaway, or you might see at Barnes and Noble like the front, depending on how they're working it. There's always a million exception of these. This is just an average rollout for kind of a book that's well established within the system, usually with more known authors. Now, the Marvel omnibuses, things like that, get wrapped up in the cycle, but they don't necessarily have a soft cover, and they also have incredibly limited printing. So they're going to print one, especially now with the paper shortage. They may not print like a Fantastic Four Omnibus Volume 4 for ever, until after that, like maybe in a decade or so, they might give it a whirl up. More interestingly, I point out that like Amazing Spider-Man has more than what I own for omnibuses. And I have three. The Fantastic Four, I bought 4 volumes. Daredevil only has one, is where I was kind of trying to get to with that. And it's odd because it feels like there should be a second volume for a myriad of reasons. None of the least of which is that the second volume actually has more noteworthy comics that would be available in it in 40 through 80 than are really in the first one. Due to the way Daredevil went. Although Daredevil's bizarre because there's so much talent at any given time and stuff rotate really quickly early on. It's interesting, but I don't know why they haven't done a second. They've done enough of the Masterworks, which is all that they're doing for the omnibus editions, as they take like 3 to 4 of the Masterwork collections and they put them together with the essays and all, and then just put it forward. I don't know. It's an interesting little side of the business that I learned a little bit more about, but most of the ones I have came wrapped, but on that wrap there was that mark because I was trying to buy from places where it was cheaper because it went from being like, $100 down to like 60, 40 depending. And I was usually able to work it to get a little bit less than that. And it's worth it when there is no other way to buy these kinds of issues. There's no other collections that are available, or some of the masterworks that, again, would have been like a third, a fourth of one of these would have cost as much as one of these due to the printing that I mentioned before. A lot of this older stuff is getting harder and harder to find, and these are the reprints. I find that bizarre, and why there aren't just like regular trades with the Fantastic Four, kind of like the essential collections that they put together, not the color ones, but the Epic collection, I guess, with the little bar at the top, that are like, good like 10 issues, whatever the series is, and you just read it like a normal trade. A very comfortable collection. I'd almost prefer them personally, but they're impossible to find except for maybe one here or there that they overprinted. But when I'm trying to get a complete set, it's not an answer. So that's been unfortunate, and that's been that chunk of collecting for a minute. And that was something I kind of landed on because I was trying to get complete Daredevil and Fantastic Four runs. So that's been a big deal. So those trades encompass up to the early stuff that I reasonably can't get issues of. Yeah, especially with Daredevil, the first collection goes much further than pretty much any of the rest of the other ones. It's 41 issues and an annual and a couple other side things from Marvel. It's one of the most encompassing ones. I think it's because Daredevil started later and the page count was maybe just a bit less. Some of the other ones, which adds up over time, not 100%, but I'm pretty sure. Then a lot of the early Fantastic Four is just unapproachable from a price standpoint, and nor would I really want to go down that road, like getting a copy of even later in This Man, This Monster, Stan Jack Classic, or the Galactus trilogy. Getting those single issues for a reader copy even is an investment. So just for one of those issues alone, I pretty much was able to get this, or one of those at a time. So beyond that, I since November have collected nearly every Fantastic Four and Daredevil comic. With Daredevil, I think my every status is a lot more complete. I haven't got things like the Defenders that he appears in, but if it's a Daredevil solo comic, if it's a one shot, if it's a major crossover, I believe I have the issue. There's a chance that there's stuff I'm missing because there's always weird corners of Marvel. And I believe the want for this is a remnant of my Untold Spider-Man days, wanting to see the different corners of the character. And there's been some crazy ones. And I have some one-shots of Daredevil that I'm working through now. Plan on talking about those because there's actually some fun stuff, and with it being Daredevil, there's not the call for it as much, so usually there's a reason why they're using Daredevil as opposed to just wanting the Marvel mascot. So it's been interesting. Fantastic Four, I believe there are some one-shots, maybe some minis that I am missing. I was a lot less judicious about it, and if there was like a Fantastic Four tie into Civil War or something, if I didn't already have it, I was much more willing to let it go because Daredevil only had like a few of those, and it felt like there was much more of a reason for it. The Fantastic Four, some of them just did not grab, and some of the ones I did bother to grab, like I've always was fascinated with the idea of Boomtown. It was this alternate universe take that's really a Marvel take, but the Fantastic Four are spearheading it, which is kind of interesting in its own right there, because that's the only time that's been done, really, if you discount, I guess, Heroes Reborn, which didn't feel like they were spearheading it, but ultimately they did. I guess Secret Wars too. Sorry, okay, so maybe it's not that unique. But I got that. I don't know. I got the 1, 2, 3, 4 mini, the 4 Marvel Knights, because they had a Marvel Knights Fantastic Four comic. I can't wait to dig into that, see what that was about. I'm really excited to get to the Fantastic Four, but I'm doing Daredevil first. Some of you might have seen that because I've been posting them here sporadically, and I need to find a better roll through for it. But I've been trying to do like every Daredevil comic as a TikTok. That might be too ambitious of a project. I'm probably going to want to limit that to, when I say just the main series, I mean that's like 95% of all Daredevil comics. So I might, if I was going to go that far, I'd do the other stuff too. Um, I don't know, but I am enjoying it. And I feel like that will be more doable as I get to later, more modern comics for, when they start eating like popcorn, even in the 90s when they're not necessarily writing for the trade or anything, right? It's still going to be a more contained issue than the early cartooning days with like Wally Woods, Stan Lee, uh, did Neil Adams, I don't know, like mostly pre Frank Miller. I mean, even the Roy Thomas stuff kind of has that vibe, but I feel like once you get past that era and start moving a bit more modern, what happens in each issue is going to be a little punchier. So that's the other thing. Like I said, I have these collections up to a point. Daredevil, I'm counting my run as complete. I have a few issues coming in from eBay, and that caps it, except for 2 issues. The first appearance of Bullseye and the first appearance of Elektra. I'm looking at those, but they're big key issues, so it would cost as much as a lot more than any one of those to get a reader's copy of those issues. I have a reprint of the first Bullseye, so I think I'm satisfied with that. But the first Elektra, even getting the reprint would cost $40, and at that point it feels like, well, then why don't I put that $40 towards getting an actual copy? But then the actual copies, there's a reason. I don't know. It feels like more than any other big issue, like biting the bullet would be a bit more worth it, because then I'd have this very complete collection, but then I'd have so much more reason to go back and get the Bullseye one. So I'm wrestling with that right now. I'm sure I'll give in, but for now, excepting one issue, I can go through and read every Daredevil comic through, which is pretty exciting. Like, that's a lot of collecting. The Fantastic Four, to get where I did and how I went about it, was actually easier for the most part. I did have to suck it up for one issue, which was 112, which is the big Hulk thing fight. That was like one of the biggest keys, except for one of the Mark Miller issues that has the first appearance of Old Man Logan, apparently, which felt like such a crock. Like, why am I paying extra for this? Because I don't have it. But that felt a little dirty. But I mean, that key was like, I was able to find one for like $15. That didn't sting too much. The 112 I got for basically 40 plus shipping. The shipping was a little high, but for that was really good. It's reader copy. You can see some scruffs and stuff on the cover, which is a little under what I like to get the condition at for the books that I've been going through, but there it was like, well, how much do you care? So that's been an interesting thing that's made me encounter a lot of things in collecting I haven't before. I need to get some Silver Age bags to replace the ratty ones that have these valuable comics in them. So that different comic sizes is a different thing. Realizing the page count is much different, and how many books can fit in a box has been different. Needing to go to reprints just to find reader copy availability has been a big difference, going down that road that I already discussed. And just kind of the volume of it and kind of seeing the value rise. And that's another big reason why I've been going down those roads, is that, and I'm sorry I'm not really showing covers or anything here, but we're talking like about a dozen boxes of comics. Just... it's a lot. It's been really interesting to go through that, and while I'm doing it, I just had this tick in my head around November, like, okay, they bought Fox, they're done with the Spider-Man thing, and I know that the value of these comics is so tied to the movies now, where inevitably they pull a couple characters for a movie, and then suddenly their first appearances and major appearances become keys, minor keys, whatever, and the whole value kind of rises, and the availability for all this stuff is somewhat locked, so it creates this shift, and the prices just kind of creep up. And while I was buying this stuff I was pricing out for and being like, okay, I have a few months so I can do this, that, I saw the prices creep up while I was in the middle of doing it. And so I had to like accelerate my schedule to get stuff because it's like, well, it's eating it now, but it's going to be cheaper later and then I'll be done. So hopefully I can turn off this collector switch, which is where I'm struggling now, and just call it. So I pushed ahead, and it makes those keys even a little harder to look at now, right? And so it's been interesting to watch because for years, most of the time I've been collecting comics. Comics were a weird thing. The movies were there, but it didn't really push the value except for like, yeah, the first appearance or major appearance of a character that was in the movie would go up a bit and then usually sink down a bit after. Things like the first appearance of Venom with the Venom movie coming out, that went up, I guess, but it was already so high, like, who could tell? But now it just feels like there's been a shift and the comics have seen more value, which is interesting in a way, but I wish it conferred also to more of the sales of the regular comics where that would be reported, which in looking at the numbers in relation to movies and whatnot, I think they have. But part of it is you have to keep in mind that the sales are also tied to how they're publishing it. And Marvel, many years ago now, I forget the exact time, but they changed away from doing as much like reprints and being a more friendly publisher to this is our first print, and then after that, because they wanted to instill more of a collector's mentality, which at the time I groaned, and I'm groaning more now. It's interesting to see that this happened, and this happened. I mean, obviously 2010s somewhere, but like around the time Matt Fraction was doing X-Men is how I know this, because I was collecting this a couple of years ago and stuff more post Marvel having their volume ones and start doing the volume rollouts is around the time this happened. And I know this because if you go and you collect a lot of the issues right before that, you can go get those issues and they're as cheap as you're going to find your average Marvel issues. Stuff after that becomes more expensive because there's less of it. Even though there's probably more people buying a lot of it at certain times. Like the Dan Slott Silver Surfer run, which is another thing I bought during this maelstrom of comics. The value of that is really high because not only was there only so many published, it was kind of a B book. They weren't sure how it was going to do. The people who own that have held on to it. There's not a lot in circulation because it's a really good run. Also, if you're into it, you're going to have the whole run, which is like about 40 issues because it's split up between 2 volumes for dumb Marvel reasons. But it's really good and it's increasingly hard to find. And so finally they're going back and they're doing a reprint with one of the omnibus coming out. And they're also reprinting the She-Hulk run from Dan Slott, which was something I wanted to go get in issues, but when I saw the price point, I said, no. And then the next month they announced a collection, and I was able to get it for cheap through where I buy comics, so I just signed up for one. I have no idea when it's coming in. So I don't know. It's just been an interesting thing to go through that. And yeah, the Fantastic Four Daredevil stuff has been the main focus of mine because getting those runs and then a lot of the B stuff is it's a lot. Okay. Another thing I started buying was Berserk. And it's something my wife was making fun of me for because I essentially already owned it, but I owned some of the regular volume editions. This is a guide that was never reprinted in these, but the reprints that I got are that much bigger. This is about the size, for per page of a normal comic. And the difference for the detail of art in Berserk is noteworthy for this kind of a thing. It's kind of like when Kirby fanatics get their oversized comics more to what Kirby actually drew on. That difference is more than just helping appreciation, allows you to actually see things you couldn't really see on the smaller page because it's so small. And also with Berserk being, black and white toned, there's details or depth that's pretty much impossible to get on the cheaper paper, and with the lesser printings that tend to be a bit splotchier when you have your regular manga stuff. Though I say that's like a Tokyo Pop printing. Dark Horse tends to do a better job with better paper, especially for something like Berserk when you're paying the premium prices for it. But when you start collecting these, it is a notable jump in quality, and for a series like this, it is very worth it. Though, I'm just going to very quickly say, not for the first, essentially 2 of these volumes. While the Kentaro Miura was finding his voice and finding what he wanted to do with the book, it kind of is what it is, and then it just comes together in a very big way, which is why so many people gravitate towards this series. It's been something that's been really interesting to dive into because I'm not as big into manga, but reading this and seeing it, there's a lot of talk about from people like, well, manga does this and manga does that. And it's like, well, it's all comics, but there is industry splits and there are different things. And I know this. And I think it's important to recognize, even when you're trying to say, comics are comics no matter where they're from. That's true, but there's differences. And it does make me want to maybe, back away from some of the lesser Marvel stuff after a few years when I catch up on my X-Men read through, my Spider-Man read through, my Fantastic Four read through, my Daredevil read through, and some others I'll show you. There's some different stuff here, and that's great, and that's cool. And it's good to probably take in maybe a little bit of manga each year to keep your palette a little more fresh and not so stuck into one mode like I have been for years. So that's been really great. And so I have all of the giant collections that are available and will continue to get them as they come out now. Berserk's very much worth the throw, and I'm glad I got this as something of kind of a palate cleanser for when I need to step away from my Marvel stuff. One interesting oddity that I got while going through things is this. It's an actual paperback novel of Daredevil. Haven't read it yet. Heard good things, though. But this was actually more of a collector's item than a number of the comics that I kind of would assumed would have been. This is weirdly hard to find. And I got it from some secondary seller for like $1 because most people don't look into these things. But another fun oddity. Another thing I'm excited to get to is the Sandman Omnibus collection that I put in a little bit of a pretty penny for, again, closer to November than now. But I made sure to get this because this was a collection I've wanted for a long time, and I figured I'd get to it, and I got to it. But then I heard wind that they're recollecting these in 2 Starman compendiums. It's the same content, but there are 6 of these double-sized hardcovers, and there are only 2 of those compendiums, and they're soft cover. I tend not to try to worry too much about the exact collection of the comic, but try to be consistent with whatever collection I choose. But those compendiums, I don't know how those are supposed to work. I've seen them. They're so big you can't even flip through it without cracking the spine. It's too much weight on one book. It's not a good printing in a way that I don't normally talk about those things, and there's a reason because I don't care as much as a number of people. But those compendiums are a mistake. Very clearly, if you see one, you'll immediately know what I'm talking about. It's like over 1,000 pages on nothing supporting it. I don't know what they were thinking. The sad part is these are actually, for the most part, not too bad, except for 2 volumes. And one of them in particular, they underprinted, and it goes for hundreds of dollars on its own. And honestly, 75% of the amount that I paid for my collection was for one of the volumes. But getting them all at once, helped. So it's another thing I plan on reading soon that I've heard great things about and have meant to read for years. Another couple things I collected were based on artists. So I got an itch to read some more Scott McCloud, so I pulled this, The Adventures of Abraham Lincoln, pulled out my copy of Understanding Comics to go through again, but also got Reinventing Comics. And I'm excited to go through all that because I want to see what McCloud did. I also need to pull out my copy of Zot, but that's on a shelf somewhere, and I'll get there. I also pulled out the Ross, Kruger, all that, the Earth X collection with Marvel's X and my old copy of Earth X that I dusted off. And then I got, I don't know why, the Universe and Paradise X collections. Again, going back to that printing and availability thing, I thought those were just going to be finding copies. I didn't think it was going to be a big deal. They're pricey now. I don't know anybody who's talked about them in over a decade, but they're impossible to find. I think it's because Alex Ross's name is on it, but I wanted to make sure to go through this, other Marvel universe that was a very different take, and I snatched it up. Pure FOMO. Pure FOMO. Another thing that would almost be worth doing a video of its own, but I have nothing to say, is the Daredevil Samurai, which is the Daredevil with Shano Kanasama and Karisagi. I mispronounced both of those. But this was like meme Deadpool, and that's it. This was painful to read. Would not recommend. I've definitely heard a lot of positive things online because it's very much for that community of people who just want a bunch of lame jokes. This is rough. I have the second volume coming that I got super cheap, and I'm probably just going to flip these right away. They're worth nothing, though. Yeah, just thought I'd get my 2 cents out there since we're talking random stuff I got recently. Another thing I got recently, because I got a lot of Mike Allred not too long ago. I collected Static X forever ago, or X Static, sorry. And then I read through that Silver Surfer run, and then recently through other videos you might have seen, I read Allred's stuff when he was working with Matt Fraction, Fantastic Four, and I thought, I tried Man forever ago, but I want to try it again, and so I got into this. Actually, I got into this because the second volume was available through Where I Get Comics, and it was a fair price. This cost a bit more for a used copy, but totally worth it. There's a third compendium, or what do they call them? Volume. And what's funny is these are taller than the Marvel Omnibus collection, so I have to put it on a different shelf because it's the only shelf it will fit on. This is the biggest book I own. Yeah. Well, one of 2 anyways. And I want to get that third one, but I swear they just reprinted the second one. The third one has to be on the way, and I should just be patient instead of paying the piper on that. So I'm excited to get there. and that should be fun. But this is something I want to read, but with everything else I've shown you, it's not exactly top of the pile either. In line with all that, I also wanted to point to a big Grendel collection that I have coming. Again, I don't know when, but is ordered. Because I've wanted to read Grendel actually for a long time, and I would have jumped on it much earlier, around the time I was reading Mage years ago. I have a great podcast with Eric from Longbox Review, and we need to do the second volume. God, I hope they print the third in a nice similar compendium soon. But Grendel, I meant to read, but it's not available. Dark Horse just reprinted the first major collection of Grendel that they have, which was from Comico originally, and I'm excited. But it is so frustrating again. I mean, it's Dark Horse, it's Marvel, it's DC. Getting a hold of the stuff that you think should just be readily available just is not happening. And if you just want to read these classic comics, it's really seeming like a digital archive that's clean, no one's going to complain about in some way, really needs to be available. But when it's shoehorned by Marvel, by DC, especially when DC especially, okay, and here, this could be a whole topic, but the short version is this: DC owns a lot of comics for their archives. They've bought a lot of comic companies. They have at least the rights to the archives. They should make them available digitally for people to read on a subscription. There you go. In that vein, while I was having this whole thing going, I've been watching a lot of cartoonist kayfabe, and some of that you might know influenced maybe some of this, especially the Scott McCloud stuff. I was very taken with a video that they did about Sin City, and I'd like to go read more Sin City. I could get a couple collections, but if I'm going to do it, there's only 7. But some are hard to find, and I just, how is that not easy to find? I just want one nice, clean collection. I don't want the huge. I'll be honest. I think Frank Miller has some cool art. I don't think for the most part you get any more from Frank Miller from blowing it up. I'd be very happy with. I wouldn't want the digest necessarily. They're just, a regular trade size collection. Would be great. Those are not priced the way they should. And how those aren't in forever print. Like, that should be Dark Horse's Watchmen. Just have a 7-pack available. You could go to Barnes & Noble, pick it up, get it from the discount sellers online, because there's a million of them. Maybe there's some different covers. Who cares? Just make them available. It's Sin City. Does Dark Horse have anything bigger than Sin City? I don't. Maybe, because Dark Horse has a lot of great comics, but bigger than Sin City? I don't know. Here's where I start just flipping through some comics of stuff I got recently. This Deadpool The End is queued up right here because it's the next comic I want to read. Here's a She-Daredevil. It's the second part of a 2-part She-Daredevil thing that was poorly labeled. The first part was okay. I don't know who she is really still. There's this. There's a lot of Daredevil one-shots that I'm going to talk about. The 2 and then Daredevil Noir, I guess. I don't know. There was that. I'm excited to go through some of that. I also... Let's see here. I got some Deadpool issues. The reason why is Deadpool team-up. I was missing 2 issues to have a complete run. I made a My Comic Shop order. I realized that. Same with Despicable Deadpool. Missing a couple issues. Once something else comes in, I'll have that complete run. Can't wait to read through this. Oh, this is something I actually already read. This was a really fun comic. Makes me interested to check out the J.M. DeMatteis Silver Surfer run, but I think I'm marveled out for a while after I get through everything I go through. This should be fun. I grabbed this. Cable dies. It's sad. It's one of the few issues I'm missing from this run, just to get it. then I cleaned out the Savage Avengers at the start of this November. I was listening to some stuff, and Damien was talking it up along with a few other people, and I thought I'd check it out. I had fun reading it, but by the time I got to the end of it, I was like, okay, I read it, I'm done. I don't think I'll ever want to read it again. So, I don't know, it was okay. Nothing against it, but it's nothing I plan on returning to. I don't think there's going to be a big call for it. Here we go. Someone was talking about this run. It's Peter Mayer's Our Man. I've heard some good things from from Joel, and plan on checking it out. Here was, I think, the sign that I needed to slow down and stop. Basically, here is the entire second volume of Alpha Flight. Basically what happened was I saw a listing for the first volume of Alpha Flight that came down to be less than $2 an issue. And I thought, why not? At the time. So I have that. The guy who sent it to me, whose name was I Have Issues, sent it to me, and then it was missing about a dozen issues from the run. I contacted him. Guy freaked out. Was like, I'm sorry, I'm going to get those to you right away. He initially thought he just left them somewhere, which was weird. And then said, I'm sorry, they're not here. They must have been filed in with some other stuff I was selling. I'm just going to get those to you. So he bought this from other people and then sent them my way. And then one of the issues didn't get included. I was like, hey, this one didn't get included. I assumed he just needed to bug the guy. I did not put a rush on it, but I was also not going to say anything other than just what I needed, because I don't want to be a jerk, but I also don't want to, let things go. Like, dude, you should have just checked your thing and then sent it out. Like, you should have just had the collection together, put it in a box or something, got that ready to ship out. Like, I don't know why you made this harder on yourself. So there's a whole rigmarole, but I'm one issue down. It's supposed to be on the way. I'm just going to wait. But while that was happening, it was like, well, I'm in it to win it with Alpha Flight. So I got the second volume, then I have the third volume and the fourth volume on the way, and so now I own Alpha Flight. Why? Because I could, I guess. There's no good reason. Another thing I got was the 2 Batman Grendel things Matt Wagner did. Like I said, interested in Grendel. These have never been republished. I imagine there's a rights issue, because, between Dark Horse and Comico for them, and then DC being weird about that kind of stuff, I figured I'd grab these. They were cheap. I have a feeling with Grendel seemingly creeping up, it might go somewhere. If not, I wanted to read them regardless. I already have. They were... didn't do a ton for me. One thing I bought out of curiosity, again, it was there at a local store discount, was Secret Wars 2. Got the entire 9 issues. Also, I don't know, when you go through older Marvel, you see the little thing in the corner, tie into Marvel, Secret Wars 2. I don't know. I've heard mixed things, mostly bad things, actually. But I'm actually curious, and I think despite the jank, I might be able to enjoy this on a different level. The idea of throwing God into the Marvel Universe, I think, is fun in a way I can appreciate. I got these. I got a small Hulk run from 407 to 419, all Peter David stuff. These were just so cheap, and they were tied to some of the Daredevil issues I was getting. And it literally cost... The way it worked out was it only cost a few more dollars for me to get these issues and combine shipping, basically, than to not, because of the way a discount work. So I was like, you know what? If I don't like them, I can flip them. It'd be easy to make, you know, $10 off of this. So I did that. I don't know. um, Another thing I did, Joel recommended this. Oh, not telling him to. Okay. Sorry. So Joel recommended this. It's a run I've actually wanted for a while because I had a few issues when I subscribed to Marvel directly. That was a thing you could do. I was getting Agent X, which was off of Deadpool, and that series ended. And I'm still mad because one of my copies has a huge bend in it because they sent it poorly. But when they switched it out, they were just like, you get Captain Marvel. Why Captain Marvel? It made no sense. Like, technically, Agent X was Deadpool, which was technically an X book. I was getting new X-Men, but there was like 3 other X books. And they're like, no, you like Deadpool, so you get Captain Marvel. Okay, so I had a few of these issues. They were interesting, but I could never really make heads or tails of them because they were later in the run. So I have the run. I know I have the 0 issue somewhere in my boxes downstairs, so I'll, fish it out when I'm ready to go. But I got this entire run, which is not only Peter David heard good things, but it's Crisscross on the art. One of the major things he did other than Slingers. So I'm down. I'm excited because I like me some Crisscross, though he's not through the whole thing. Though David and Starlin Vingram, like, it's not like the art was hurting on this. Eventually, this run splits. This was before that was as common a thing, but it split between 2 volumes, and I got both. Getting the second one was harder for a number of reasons. But I really like the covers when they flip over. And to give you an idea, just saw it. This was one of the 3 issues in a row that I got, which is like the tail end of the second volume of this run. Like, clearly they're like, you're in it at this point or not. So I'm curious to go back to it. I'm pretty mad. I did buy a collection of A plus X, and then I found out it was like only half of that run. So now I have like a back half of that run to get, but I'm not sure if I'm motivated enough to bother. Yeah. And then... Oh yeah, I got Great Lakes Avengers and the Dan Slott mini that preceded it, so I have most of the Great Lakes Avengers stuff now for no good reason. And then, one thing, because I was talking to a friend and I was buying all this other Marvel stuff. I'm like, I'm doing all this now. And then I think maybe next year I'll get Thunderbolts. And just because I was talking to him, I then looked at it, started pricing it out, look at some pricing history, and realized Thunderbolts is on the rise. Again, the FOMO hit, but also, like, I think there's rumors of either characters or the idea of Thunderbolts coming because it'd be such a natural next step for the movies to take advantage of that. Because, I mean, if you don't know Thunderbolts, the idea of playing a series of new characters as heroes, then you unmask them, and then they're related to or villains that we've seen before, would really actually work. So I dug in. I got Thunderbolts from here to yonder, and I'm happy with that too. it was funny though, because Thunderbolts 1 is a pricey comic. So figuring that out, working around that while I still had the bandwidth to do so, because there's still people who don't necessarily know what they're sitting on. Not that they don't think Thunderbolts 1 is valuable, but they don't realize that Thunderbolts 2 and 3 are valuable now as well, so on and so forth. You get a complete run, and it balances out again. Yeah, you can get most of the issues for about nothing, but when you get pretty much every issue for $1, and then you just count a little bit more for the first, handful, it's a scream of a deal. So got that too. So it's just been way too much, and I need to slow down, and I need to actually read some of this. And that's not to say I haven't been reading comics. It's been really interesting to talk to people. On Twitter, there's this my 500 comics challenge. I'm going to read 500 comics in a year. I'm like, I read 500 comics by the end of February. I would not have been able to if I was doing the challenge and had to slow down and post, something about every comic I read. When I'm sitting down for a night and, reading a dozen or so comics, if I have to take a picture each time as opposed to just going through it, takes time. Takes time away. And then I saw there's some other challenges that people have done, and they've said some numbers, and they might be a little more ambitious than the 500 goal, but I still look at it and I'm like, yeah, I've read that by now. I don't know exactly how much I've read. I'm not counting, but I have a feel. I think when you read roughly 100 issues, you read roughly 100 issues, and you feel that a few times a year, and you're like, okay, probably about here, about there. You do some rough math, and you're like, well, I don't know, because one of those Berserk volumes, is 700 pages roughly, and a manga chapter issue, what it would have been in, like, if you're getting Shonen Jump, right? It's 10 pages. They need to do 10 pages of whatever series a week, blah, blah, blah. Each chapter is basically 10 pages. That's not 22. But 2 of those, I think, is roughly equivalent to a comic, especially now, since it's not 22, it's 20 anyways, right? The newer issues, they jumped on that. That counts, but I mean, I'm going through it, and there's usually about 8 to 10 of those per a manga volume. There's 3 of those in one of the big hardcovers. You go through a chunk when you read one of those a night, I read a Daredevil mini, and that's 6 issues, and if you just read a chunk a day, it adds up quick. And there's days I've fallen off because I'm not reading comics. I'm doing something with video games. I'm spending time with my wife, spending time with my son, whatever. But, you read a little bit here and there. Make sure to read an issue of a comic a day and keep on track. I don't know. It's just been a lot, but on top of all the comics I bought, I'm reading. I'm also listening to theories about comics. I'm working with a friend on trying to make some comics, much more lighthearted stuff generally, but doing that has given me more appreciation for the framing, the idea of comics art versus art, trying to go through that, trying to put my head to it and realizing how little I'm doing versus what these professionals are doing, and in even just trying to do the thumbnails, realizing how much goes into drawing again, and like looking at some art that I've looked at before and be like, well, that's not as good as this. It's like, no, but it's better than I'll ever be able to do. And so just kind of taking a moment to stay humble and enjoy it and just push through so much of this has been reinvigorating my love of comics. Not that it needed any of that. But I'm trying, and I'm paying attention more to people talking about more independent stuff, and I'd like to push that way in some ways, but I also feel like with independent comics, there is so much more room for digital to take place. Because I really feel like for a lot of the super more indie stuff, there's a lot of stuff that's great, explosive creativity. It's fun to look at. It's very much about the now, though. It's very much about kind of seeing what this person's doing next, how they're developing. And the idea of holding on to an archive or maybe returning to it is, less than some of the more established Marvel stuff or whatnot. And maybe, I mean, this is just my opinion, but a lot of that for most people, I imagine, is just the joy of checking it out and reading it and enjoying it and moving on to the next thing. Like, very much with that indie scene, it's like, like this person's doing this person, that's great. But if you had a digital subscription sort of thing again, and you're checking these people out, they're putting it in, they're putting work, and then they get money in and out. It's not like there's royalty rights to usually worry about or anything like that. You could also have rights that, digital rights to publish have, like people could go to the digital archive and check out the history if they haven't checked this person's stuff out before. But like they just have the digital rights to keep it, and then the artist gets X amount out and maybe they get royalties if numbers line up. But just make it quick, easy, breezy. Make it something for someone on the rise to do, because that's a paycheck. And here's some more art and stuff to check out. Like, I really feel like digital's a good place for that, and I'd be a lot more open to it. I've been thinking about trying to check out, like, heavy metal in digital, because that would be good. Because I had a subscription to heavy metal for a while, and then I have this pile of magazines I'm looking at. They're just kind of in a weird place, and I don't have any more room. I certainly don't have room for heavy metal to be taken over. So I don't know. Just stuff I've been thinking about. I've been rambling all morning, but I just wanted to talk some comics. There you go.